Good evening and welcome to St. Helen, and a very, very special welcome to all of you for being here for this very unique and special presentation. And I'd like to just offer a really fond word of welcome to Governor McGreevey for being here. Really, it's a great privilege for us to have you here to speak about the New Jersey Reentry Corporation and all the good work that you've done in this regard for so many people for so many years. And so we're delighted to welcome you, to welcome everyone here. And at this time, I'd like to invite Walter Kornmacher to offer some words.
Thank you, Monsignor Tom. And again, my name's Walter Kornmacher. I'm the co-leader of the Peace and Justice Ministry, and we're sponsoring the event tonight. And we're very excited to have Governor McGreevey here tell us about the reentry program. We think it's, from what we know, a great program, and we're excited to learn some details. So I'll just tell you briefly what the Peace and Justice Ministry is. It's the Peace and Justice Ministry of St. Helens and Holy Trinity parishes. So it's a combined two-parish ministry. And what we do is we try and help educate parishioners about social issues and social teachings of the Catholic Church, and provide them opportunities to engage in various social justice activities, including advocacy. So our big motto is we're both education and advocacy. We want to do both. And we have flyers at the entrance. If you want to learn more about us, if you want to be on our email list, you can put your name on that. The main focus areas of our group are hunger and poverty, immigration, health care, care of creation, and racism. So those are the things we focus on as a ministry. So I'm going to pass the mic to Dick Trabert, who's going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Walter. Good evening. As Walter said, I am Richard Trabert, former chair of the Peace and Justice Ministry. I'm both pleased and honored tonight to welcome our guest speaker, Governor McGreevey, the executive director of the New Jersey Reentry Corporation. Jim has a long and distinguished record of serving the public at almost all levels of government. Mayor of Woodbridge, state assemblyman, state senator, and finally, as governor of New Jersey. What is less likely known is that early in his public service career, Jim served as executive director of the State Parole Board. This is a position that gave him personal and daily exposure to the issues facing incarcerated men and women who were seeking to return to civil society. Years later, he moved from public service in government to public service in social agencies. But his experience in government on issues affecting the state's prison population provided him with the understanding and sensitivity he needed to make a prison outreach program effective and meaningful. Today, Jim heads an organization whose primary mission is to transition released prisoners into society by giving them the skills, the training, and the counseling such transition requires. Jim also works with Cardinal Tobin of Newark to train priests to recognize the signs of opioid addiction and steer the addicts to treatment. And he has another program to treat veterans who have suffered the consequences of combat. On the personal side, Jim is a graduate of Columbia University, has a law degree from Georgetown, a master's in education from Harvard, and a master's of divinity from the General Theological Seminary. Appropriately, Jim's presentation is entitled Second Chances, a Christian Imperative. Let me close by this. Chapter 5 of St. Matthew's Gospel includes the story that Jesus told his disciples about the Son of Man separating the nations into sheep and goats. Among the reasons that Jesus offers for giving redemption to the sheep is I was in prison and you came to visit me. Jim and the New Jersey Reentry Corporation have taken Jesus' standard to heart by helping prisoners, addicts, and veterans return to our society. It's a great pleasure to invite Governor McGreevey to take the stand.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, my friend. Thank you. I'll just share with you one political story. And one, I want to say thank you to Monsignor. I mean, it's relatively uncomfortable to be here, Monsignor, and not have a collection taken up for the 7 o'clock Mass. But on a personal note, I just wanted to share with, so I had the pleasure of serving in the State Parole Board for Governor Kane. And years later, and I have great affection for Governor Kane, as anybody who's ever had to work with a governor, he's just an exemplary human being. So one quick story is I was running for the state Senate, and this was in Woodbridge High School. They were having one of these debates, and I was on one side, the Democratic side, and the Republican candidate was on the other side. And he starts lambasting Governor Kane, and he's the Republican candidate. And I go, just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then he continues, and he's just criticizing the governor of a solid waste policy, and he's frankly taking what for me was the facile position where I respectfully thought Governor Kane was taking the studied position. And so and quickly a political calculus goes through my head because I realize the reporter's there, I'm ostensibly the Democratic candidate. And so he just keeps going on, and finally I just I can't stomach it anymore. And I just just went after what he said. And so, and the reporter didn't know what to make of it. And so in a strange twist of events, the Democratic candidate for Senate was defending the Republican administration. And I mailed it to Governor Kane, and I said, because I had been on the director of the State Parole Board, I said, well, it's back on the Kane team. And Governor Kane mails me a card that has, the inimitable THK, Thomas Howard Kane. He goes, I never knew you left. But anyway, I don't do a Brahmin accent well, but anyway. But I just want to say thank you to all of you, and definitely to Dick and Jermaine, my dear friends. I want to say thank you. And I also have a few other friends that are here, and I'm just really grateful. And Anthony is here, and Anthony's going to share a little bit about his story. And Justice Anthony was on death row, and he's just going to share his perspective, which I think is so powerful. And he schlepped all the way from Pensy. Where in Pensy? An hour and a half he drove to be here with you to talk about his story. And when you hear his story, I can talk in academic tones, but when you hear Anthony's story, I think you're going to be really moved from the heart as to what is the necessity of reentry. Let me just share, and to go back to Dick's very kind introduction. So much of our criminal justice system, obviously, and Justice is here, those that have studied the law or studied philosophy. Philosophy, if we go back to a Judeo-Christian notion, but particularly a Christian or Thomistic notion, was the understanding of pursuing virtue. And then in the early English ecclesiastical courts, there was a notion, there was a gradual separation between the courts of law and the courts of chancery. The courts of law were to determine or interpret the law as, I'm going to drive the poor guy who's in charge of this camera nuts. I think I'm supposed to just stand here. But I mean, the courts of law, and then the courts of chancery, or the courts of equity, and we all remember that great play, A Man for All Seasons. The courts of equity were to determine, if you will, what was the equitable remedy in the case that the law had produced an inappropriate outcome. One of the challenges today is, and I remember I hearken back to when I was a young assistant prosecutor in Middlesex County, is that you particularly have almost a binary result. It's either guilt or innocence. And guilt or innocence with whatever that denotes. A guilt typically denotes, obviously, a prison or jail or prison term, and innocence, frequently you walk out the door. And I would just respectfully suggest that has its own value in determining the nature of a crime, if a crime has been committed, the harm that that crime clearly has done to the victim. But it doesn't do anything in terms of repairing the breach of the divide. And so in terms of restorative justice, and it's a concept that it's in large measure been fueled by committees of social justice, activists from the faith community. It's an understanding that, yes, we necessarily have to have a decision as to the guilt or innocence, particularly in the criminal justice sector, but we should be doing so much more. That if an individual, say, for example, is innocent, and you just open that door, even though they're in the midst of an opioid addiction, you really haven't accomplished, perhaps, what you ought to accomplish by virtue of that circumstance. So, I'll give you an example, and I'm careful because you have a justice of the Supreme Court, anonymously sitting in the back. But one of the things that I'm acutely aware of is that these are all human beings with which we grapple. So at the end of the day, I look at our position at New Jersey Reentry, not within the confines of, I don't serve the prosecutor's tail, although I work very closely, and I certainly don't serve the public defender's end, because so frequently we're in the business of requiring the people with whom we have the privilege of serving to do things that they probably rather would not do. And so what we see ourselves in terms of the understanding restorative justice is the understanding that this person, this individual is going to go back into the community, and we have to help them repair that breach. And so whether it's the individual, say, for example, on our clients, we have now over 26,000 clients, and we follow them for a 3-year period. And we follow them on Salesforce, that overwhelmingly 76 to 78% are suffering from addiction. 42% of that 78% are opioid use disorder. And then in addition, we have a co-occurring mental health diagnosis, upwards of 47% of the individuals. So overwhelmingly, our clientele is addicted, with almost half having co-occurring mental health disorders. So if you were to look at individuals coming out of prison, and Anthony's going to talk about this from a firsthand knowledge, you have individuals that have come out after significant swaths of time, returning to a community that has largely forgotten them, where they no longer have family, they no longer recognize their neighborhood, they don't have support in terms of medical support, and particularly women. Women coming through state prison find it particularly difficult because so many women have not had access to an OBGYN. We often say prisons were designed by men for men. In fact, their healthcare is negotiated by men, usually in a statewide contract. But whether it's medical, OBGYN, HIV, whether it's behavioral, whether it's addiction treatment or mental health, there's clearly a dearth of those services in the prison complex. So when people come out of prison or jail or addiction treatment, they're usually significantly troubled. Now, just for a second, and excuse my bias being Irish discussing the English prison system, but if you can for a second think, if there was an ideal place to put a young man or young woman who was convicted of CDS distribution charges, it probably wouldn't be state prisons. Because in state prisons, clearly the behavior that's learned over and over again is behavior of survival. It's not behavioral based, it's not virtue based. Good behavior isn't rewarded and bad behavior isn't punished. Prison is a place, as Anthony will describe, of brutal, harsh survival, where the only lesson is simply power. And so what we contend is, and take, for example, if we can put the entirety of the question of the appropriateness of sentencing guidelines up on the shelf. That's not the focus of our remarks today. What we're talking about is taking the individuals who have just come through that cauldron, just come through that difficult period, and now are about to re-enter without the benefit of family, without the benefit of medical support, without the benefit of legal support, having that large stain of a felony conviction, and then attempting to try to secure housing, healthcare, employment, and re-entering into civil society. So what I make up is that if any of us here were dropped in the middle of any neighborhood, whether it was bucolic, Westfield, whether it was an urban area or rural area, and we dropped out of a space, and we did not have an identification, we did not have a driver's license, we did not have a health care card, be it a Medicaid card, we did not have a place to live, housing, we did not have food in terms of SNAP or food stamps, and we did not have access to employment, we would be hard-pressed not to do what so many individuals do when they exit, which is recidivate. I'm not saying that's a healthy decision, a good decision, or clearly not a lawful decision. But to understand, if you will, and that's why I'm so grateful to Anthony for coming an hour and a half, is to understand in really gritty terms how his faith and how his transformative understanding of his own life, in large measure through his faith, has helped him to overcome the struggles of his past. So for us in reentry, we provide 5 basic services. One is connecting people to identification in MVC. ID, ID, ID. Identification is essential in 2023. If you don't have an identification, you can not only not get into a building, you can't access any basic care. You can't access, if you don't have an identification, you can't access Medicaid. You can't access SNAP. You can't access general assistance. And typically what happens when people leave prison, they have one card, the New Jersey State Department of Corrections card. That's the only card you have when you come out of prison. And I'm not going to go through the whole, counting of points and the identification, but ID, 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 and also motor vehicle, driver's license if possible. In addition to that, as part of our legal services, we clean up the legal wreckage of the past. So if Jim is driving, and now I'm legally out, bless you, and I have the capacity to be out, but I may have 15 warrants outstanding that I can get picked up on. How often does that happen? My brother used my identification, a friend used identification, maybe not a friend that used identification, maybe I had a ticket before I went into jail, maybe I have a warrant due for child support, any other concern. So what New Jersey Reentry does is we have legal points of contact in all of our sites. We have 10 sites in central and northern New Jersey that clean up the legal wreckage of people's lives. And there's a little known statute that monetizes every day in jail. And the judges are usually very good about accepting this monetization. So at the end of the day, the community of Westfield, is Westfield a borough or a town? Town, thank you. The township of Westfield isn't going to get any money, but a judge will negate those tickets based on the length of time served. So that's so critically important, because if there's a warrant outstanding, you can be doing something legal, but say if one of your requirements for parole or one of your requirements for probation is you're making a drug treatment program, and then you don't show up to the drug treatment program because you were stopped, because an officer had a proper stop because you had a light out in your tail light, and then he finds out that you have a warrant outstanding, you could conceivably be back in the local municipal jail. So what we try to do is to clean up, if you will, the legal wreckage so that you can function. So MVC, ID, driver's license / legal. Second is medical, medical, medical. By medical, I mean medical and behavioral. It's so critically important. The number of our guys and gals that have tattoos, have hepatitis B, have hepatitis C, the number of individuals that are suffering from diabetes, the number of women, candidly, that haven't had access to proper gynecological examination, overwhelmingly medical, medical, medical. And then what I also shared with you earlier, those stats on addiction and mental health. So medical and mental health. Third is the importance of accessing all state and federal programs that are available to you. So the largest pot of money is still what they call general assistance, right? What we used to call welfare. What we understand is that we have to provide a bridge. Our goal is employment for those that can. Now, obviously, there are those individuals, particularly our veterans, many of which, just parenthetically, 1 out of every 3 veterans in the United States are now court involved. Just keep that in the back of your head. 1 out of every 3 are court involved. And Dick, as a West Point graduate, the nature of war has changed so profoundly, both by virtue of the technology that's utilized in war, repeat deployments, and the trauma that's suffered. And I'll just, if you can just put that as a point of reference in terms of our veterans. There's a higher percentage of veterans in our state prisons than there are in the general population. So that you need to understand, to appreciate the challenge of those veterans. So it's general assistance that we fight for. It's SNAP, which is food stamps. And then we also work long-term. Number 4 is to connect individuals to housing. We believe in structured, sober housing. And that's so important because it's about community, community, community. During COVID, we saw so many individuals candidly die of overdose. You're by yourself, looking at 4 white walls, no support, no love, no human interaction. Bluntly, you're sitting there in some hotel on Route 1 in front of a flat screen TV, and you've been released. Addiction, while it's not your friend, it's your companion. So structured, sober, community-based housing that we believe in. And the last thing is working with houses of worship, people, places, and things. And whether it's AA, whether it's NA, whether it's a shul, a church, a mosque, whatever it is, it's providing people with a sense of community, which is so important, so people have something to share with another individual. Community, the beloved community, is so critically important. So those are our 5 basic services that we provide. But our backdrop is, and Dick was kind enough in the introduction, when we talk about understanding forgiveness, forgiveness is at the key of what we do. Forgiveness is important because, as Monsignor will say, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. It's important that people forgive the violence that others have done to them, but it's also important that people forgive themselves so that they are able to move forward with the journey. The most difficult cases are where individuals don't forgive themselves for the actions. I had one case, and I'm a young Marine. He shot up what he thought was a Russian convoy. And instead of Russian soldiers, they were Afghan children in the convoy. And he did what he thought was right, but he simply couldn't forgive himself. And I'll spare you the pain and the stories and and the children's expressions, but he couldn't forgive himself. And the challenge is, if God can forgive you, who are you to not forgive yourself under the most difficult of circumstances? So forgiveness is key to us, is key for us, not only within the individuals we're privileged to serve, but it's key to the greater community. Because unless we're able to forgive these individuals and allow them to return into society, that scarlet F for felon will be there with the rest of their lives. And just 30 more seconds before I introduce Anthony. There's all sorts of great books written on Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow. There's a couple great texts out of Fordham. There's one great text that I love out of Yale. One of the things that's interesting, before our founding fathers, in the early colonies, crime by the early Puritans almost came out of the Hebraic tradition. Crime was equated as sin. And when someone committed a crime, that crime was punished, and whether it was stockades, but then an individual was welcomed back into the community in whole. So to understand the basic notion that, yes, people commit sins, and Christians and Catholics believe in forgiveness and the sacrament of penance, but we have moved remarkably away from that early colonial notion of sins, penance, redemption, and wholeness. And so the challenge for reentry is, and particularly candidly in the era of the internet, even when people have expungements, one of the real challenges for our guys and gals is when I get an expungement and all my crimes are gone, but then I apply to the Traybert Corporation and I say that I have no crime, and I can Google in 30 seconds and find out, well, here's my criminal history. Well, you haven't been honest, but you have been because it's been expunged. Part of it is changing the attitudes of the community. So the reason why this, and I'm so grateful for Dick for this opportunity and Anthony, is to talk about how forgiveness shapes the individual. Anthony had to forgive himself. How it shapes the individuals, how it promulgated harm against him, which may have wrought a certain behavior, but it's also required for all of us. And I would make the argument, until we forgive the individual, then and only then can that person become whole and accepted in the fullness of community life. Now I'm going to introduce this great guy. Anthony's story is an exceptional one, and I'm really honored because I asked him if he could come to Westfield and come to St. Helens, and he said, sure, Jim, I'll make the effort. But Anthony's story, I had the opportunity to meet Anthony in Rahway State Prison. I keep calling it Rahway. Now they all have fancy names. It's sort of, I guess, politically correct to call it East Jersey. Actually, it was in Woodbridge, but the reason they called it Rahway is the lockbox was in Rahway. So talk about shame. Woodbridge didn't want the fact that Rahway State Prison was in Woodbridge. But one of the great things is that we work closely to create a plan of his reentry. And I'm just proud of the fact that he's married, he's a productive member of society, but his faith played a critical role in shaping who and what he is. And with that, I'm going to give the microphone to my dear friend, Anthony DeFrisco. Oh, you want to take the mic? He's an old-fashioned guy. All right, you're on.
Thank you. First, thank you all for coming. It's very important that the general public get involved in every aspect of helping people like myself come out. I just want to also say we're all praying for the people of Israel right now. Start. My name is Anthony DeFrisco. I'm Italian, 62 years old. Well, I'll be 63 on the 20th. I'm from New York, never lived in New Jersey. I started out My father owned flower shops, so I never really wanted for anything. People always have this depiction of what a criminal is and where it came from, or a person that commits crime. I don't fit anyone's picture, really. I was a bright young kid. I owned horses. I rode horses. Actually could have went to the Olympics as an equestrian rider if I decided to do so, but I didn't. My life took a different turn. There's so many issues that I could talk about, and we could spend hours on talking about these things, but one of the most important things I think that people don't really understand about young people today or anyone is divorce. Divorce changed. I was 5. My father only lived 8 blocks away. He went and opened another flower shop and started another family. I saw him every day, but he wasn't part of my life in a real way. Divorce shatters people. It changes the trajectory of your life. It just changes everything. And it's an issue that really isn't talked about or really understood. When I hear people speak about it, they usually learn from a book. They get degrees, but they don't really have real world experience. So anyway, I took a life. I was 26 years old. I was lost. I was on drugs, disillusioned, and I took a life. And I know the gentleman's name. He lives with me every day. I don't speak his name because of his family. But this gentleman will never be forgotten by me. My last memory will be of what I did to this gentleman. Then I was incarcerated. I'm going to have to skip around because it's a lot of area. Then I found myself on death row in Trenton State Prison. And I was like, wow, this is really bad. I did a really bad thing, and I'm in a really bad place. Now I have to figure out how I'm going to do this. And as Jim said, like a few years in, I had to decide to forgive myself for what I did, because that wasn't the person I was. I love everyone. I love animals. I mean, drugs just took me to a place I never thought I would go. It just changed who I was fundamentally. I wasn't running around hurting people, but I ended up with a group of people, ended up in a situation where this happened. Incarceration it's really what you can make of it, because there's help, but not really real help. If you want to help yourself like I did it, there's a lot of people that did even more work on themselves than I did, but I worked really hard. I took every program. I had to understand, how did the Anthony that I remember, happy-go-lucky kid, end up with a gun in his hand, taking a life, and ended up on death row? I mean, I just had to understand that, because I had no understanding of this. Life was just a blur. And the one thing that always kept me with faith was my faith. I just knew I told my father, I don't know how, but this is not the end of my story. God didn't make me live through the things I lived through and put me here to leave me here. I don't know how, but I said, Dad, one day I will walk out. He passed. My mother passed. They didn't see me walk out. But inside prison, like Jim was saying, you can do the right thing every day, and then this person will mess up, and now you'll suffer the consequences of his actions. That could be a person in another prison in another state did something with a CD. They took CDs from almost every state prison. And you're like, but I do good. I work, go to church, I do everything I'm supposed to. I don't get any infractions. Why are they destroying my cell? Why are the pictures of my family in the toilet? Why are my sheets full of coffee and peanut butter? Why did they do this? I didn't do anything. But that's the way it is. When you do good, it doesn't matter. When you do bad, it really doesn't matter. Prison is what it is.
So I just want to pick up on that point. So just so that you understand prison. So prison, Anthony, for you, wasn't a matter of good or evil, it just was. And so can you just explain, just for a second, the rhythms of prison? What happens in the morning?
Okay.
Go through the every day.
Okay, so death row is
And
completely...
I just want you to understand, because in most families, at least in my family, like if you drank the milk and you finished your breakfast and you came home and you did your homework, or you mowed the lawn or whatever it was, that was acknowledged. And if you broke the vase or, yelled at your sister, that was also acknowledged. In many ways, prison, sadly, is value neutral. It's about also a loss of agency. So one of the anecdotes that I'd like to share is, as Dick mentioned, when one of the field education works I did was up at Exodus Transitional Ministry in Harlem. And I'll never forget, there was a gentleman, he had biceps the size of this chair, and I said, well, here, call this number so that you can take your GED test. And he was literally, he could not make that call. So there are two things that I think that are important. One is it's value neutral. Good behavior is not rewarded. Bad behavior isn't punished. And second is a loss of agency, a loss of self-control, a loss of ability to do constructive things for yourselves. So can you just go through that schedule?
Okay, so death row is completely different, so I won't talk about that because I wasn't prison population. I was on death row for 16 years. I did 33 years total, straight, and the rest was done in Trenton and Rahway. You wake up in the morning. If you don't have a job or you have a job, if you don't have a job, you go to mess hall. Mess hall is a couple hundred people, very loud. It's just chaotic. You're marshaled in, you go through cages, you go in, you eat quick, you're coming out, and there's more cages, so you go from cage to cage to cage before you get to the hallway where you go through a gauntlet of officers to get back to your wing. Now you go to your wing and you sit there and you wait. You're always waiting. You're ready, you're dressed, you're waiting for a bell for them to say movement's going, is moving on. Could be any number of things that'll keep it stalled. So then you go to your job, you go to yard, stay in, do what you want, it's your choice. Nobody really monitors what you're doing, not really. So then you go where you go, then it's count time. So unless you're at your job, you can stay there sometimes, you go back to your wing for count. They count, everyone, the whole prison, count clears, then you go to lunch. Then after lunch, you go back to your cell and you wait. And then you go to your job or yard or whatever it is you're doing, law library, wherever you're going. And then 2:30, you come back for count. Then you wait, and then you go to dinner. And this is what you do every day. And then at nighttime, you have various programs. After dinner, you have various programs. You go to yard if there's night yard in the summer. You go to church, you go to law library, you go to school. Then at the end of the day, you wrap up, and let's see, everybody's in by the count. The last count is 10 o'clock, but everybody's usually in their cell or on their bunk by like 9:15. And then if you're in your cell, you could be alone, or you could, usually it's two-man cells. I did my last few years in a dorm, which I liked. And then you just do it. A day, it literally is Groundhog Day. But in between all of that, so many things could happen, mostly bad. You could be, let's say you're at your job, and there's a fight over here. So they put a code out, code 33. That means there's a fight, something violent going on. You can't move. You could be stuck there. I was in the yard for 9.5 hours in the rain. And it was cold. And we could not get in because of what took place inside. So, I mean.
So what are the lessons, what are the values of prison?
Prison will teach you patience. Prison will teach you how to, first of all, it's really based on you, what you want to do. I want to save myself, find myself, rebuild myself. And I did all of those. Some people just want to go do whatever they want to do all day and never change. Half of their neighborhood is in prison with them, for some gentlemen. So it's no different. They're living the street life in prison, and they're going to go back to that, and that's very sad. I did a lot of programs, and I tried to help as many people as I could. But anyway, for me, the virtual prison is definitely patience. But it teaches you how to really see, like, all the races. And I know a lot about black people, from black people. And they love me and respect me because I have honest conversation with them. You have a different opinion, we can talk about it. And I learned so much about different faiths, about Muslims, all kind. You can really learn a lot and absorb a lot. There are good men in prison. You just have to find them.
But what was the lesson that you learned to survive?
Like I said, honestly and truly, my thirst for freedom, to live the life I was supposed to live, but mostly my faith. I knew when I took this man's life, I knew instantaneously I broke something inside myself. I mean, I just knew it. I've done other things. I stole cars. I was never violent, but I stole cars. I did this, that.
Well, you can make an argument stealing cars are violent, but that's another story.
But when I pulled that trigger, I knew instantaneously that I crossed a line that is not meant to be crossed. I mean, I know all police officers and people in the military, they have to do what they have to do. I don't know how they live with that. From that second on, I was going this way because I was broken. I broke something inside myself. I couldn't even figure out. I mean, I didn't have those words. I knew something was wrong. And I ended up getting in trouble for some minor thing and confessed to the murder I went to prison for.
Yep.
You know, people don't know that. Yeah, this crime would never be solved. Never. I confessed to it. And they were like, it actually took me 20 minutes to convince the detective that I was serious. He said, Anthony, you'll be out. I was like, no. Detective Cook was his name, K-U-C-K. I was like, no, this is real, and I have to do this. I have to do this. Otherwise, I might as well just go eat a gun because I'm broken. I can't come back from this. I've come back from everything. I cannot come back from this. And he went and got his sergeant, and they were like, and I helped him and everything, and it was the best thing I ever did in my life. I did the worst thing by taking his life, and I did the best thing by confessing to taking his life and saved myself. And go ahead.
No, but can you talk about forgiving yourself and accepting responsibility?
You know, I went to ADSEG, which is administrative segregation for something, and the priest came to see me. Sister Elizabeth sent him to come say, you go see Anthony. So this nun is...
It's unbelievable.
I couldn't even tell. You think you man works tirelessly? She's like him.
No, she's...
Anyway, so she sent the priest, you go see Anthony. He said, Mr. Frisco? I'm like, yeah. He said, listen, Sister Elizabeth sent me to make sure you tell her I came. I was like, will do. Tell her I said my blessings. And we were talking, and he said, have you forgiven yourself? I said, yeah, I have. He said, no, really? Because I don't think you have. And he said, really, listen to me. You cannot undo what you did. You cannot put life back into that gentleman. He said, but if you don't forgive yourself, you'll never go forward. He said, you will always have one hand tied behind your back. He said, he said, you don't know me, even though he was a priest from another parish. He said, I'm telling you, you must forgive yourself. And I was like, well, how do you even do that? He said, you just pray. He said, Sister Liz told me about your faith. He said, just pray on it. And I tell you what, people say that Jesus, God came into their life and worked a miracle. I was like, yeah, okay. Let me tell you something. It's real. Because when Jesus touched my heart, and it was like, I remember I was watching basketball. It was like 9 o'clock at night. And I don't know what it was. I thought I heard something. I shut the TV off. I was like, maybe I'm losing my mind. And all of a sudden, I felt warm. And I was like, wow. I just felt different. I was like, wow. I started praying right away. And I'm not like overly religious. My faith is unshakable. But, I don't ever want to be contradict myself by saying I have faith, but I don't go to church. But I do go to church. But forgiving myself allowed me to go forward, and that's when I went on my missions. Okay, I started taking programs because up until that time I was just reading law. I was just trying to figure out how to get out of this. But that put me back in touch with my humanity. And then I said, okay, so we have to understand the pieces of the puzzle that make up Anthony. And that's what propelled me. And for that day, I was just different. Like a lot of guys like, Anthony, what are you doing? I'm like, what's wrong? What's up? He's like, you're just like floating through here now. What do you know, you're just moving around. You're a little more quiet, but you're always on the move. I'm like, yeah, because I'm seeking some knowledge to help myself. And everything was better, and everything was brighter. And
So Anthony, can you just talk about how so many of the guys, I would argue that priests helped you get to a place of restorative justice. So you looked at your responsibility
absolutely.
and your responsibility, but how so many guys, in part, and gals, but so many individuals, by virtue of the entirety of the American criminal justice system, look at guilt or innocence. So there are people, a lot of folks that I have the privilege of working they're focused on that simple dynamic, not focused on getting healthy, on their addiction, on their behaviors, on accountability. Can you talk about how the criminal justice system shapes their sense of virtue?
The thing about prison is you're always there. There is no escape. You wake up, you're there. You go to bed, you're there. You're always there. You're healthy, you're there. You're sick, you're there. Things happen. The system will grind you down. The system, the prison system doesn't really, like they have these programs, but they don't really foster participation in them because, I don't really want to get into this, but corrections doesn't really want you doing positive things in a sense because they have to invest more time in watching you and getting you to these places where you're really only going to a room over there or a room over there. You're not going 5 miles down the road, but they don't, so you really have to seek out your own rehabilitation. It's there if you want it. It is there if you want it. And people like Jim, you know, reach back in. We had people from the State House and everything, Bonnie Watson Coleman. We had individuals that would reach in and try to help, try to straighten out the prison system. It's still, even to this day, I believe it could be redone in a much more healthy way, but that's a whole nother topic because prisons as is just a stagnation. Really, if you want.
Can you speak to that no one's necessarily changing?
No.
It's almost as if people are hitting the pause button for an extended period of time. Is that valid to you?
What I say seen the light go out in people's eyes, especially when I was on the road. Like I've seen, look, I know these people 30 years, some of them, Chino and Mello. I mean, yeah. I grew up with these people. We know each other. I know them more than I know my brother. I was 26 when I went away. I was with them for 33 years, except when I was on the road. But
so my point is that you're not necessarily becoming a better person in prison.
Because it's like I said, see, each one teach one. See, I learned from the program, so if I saw you and I saw you with your head down, if I knew you or not, I might come over to you and say, what's going on? This is when I got off the row and I knew I was staying in population because I was on, off, and back on, which for 3 years I was off, slow story. So I might do it, and people do reach out and help you and bring you in. Then you have gangs and a lot of stuff, but a lot of people are just, they don't have a clue, they don't have a plan. They're just here, and they're standing there with 30 years. You're like, 30 years. What do I do? It's exhausting, but I came up with a lot of little plans to help myself. Like I figured, how do I do 30 years straight? Just for a second. Like, how do I do 30? I said, oh, okay, I can't do that. I could do 5 years. So I did 5 years. 5 years came and went. I was like, all right, I have to do 5 more years. I can do 5 years. And I did 5 years. And that's how I did it. 5 years at a time, until the day I saw you. And I said, my lawyer is good friends with Jim. And Jim actually, the guards were laughing. This guy, the governor's not going to come see this guy. I remembered him. He said, I'll bet you $10. I remember sitting in the cage, and I was laughing. I was waiting for Jim to come. And he was like, I bet you $10. He ain't no governor coming to see this guy. That's how they were speaking. And I was laughing. I said, I wouldn't take that bet if I was you. And then the administrator came, I forget her name at the time, and there was Jim, and he was like, the governor's come to see this gentleman. He goes, who are you? I said, I'm nobody. I work in the ODR, that's the officer's dining room. I'm nobody. And I knew then that for sure I was going to get out. But prison, like I said, you have gangs, you have a lot of following in this world, in the streets, and in prison. People are just following behind the alpha male, the leader. And actually, what I would do by groups, because I did NA, I mean, I taught every group in prison. So they would be sitting here, and I'd be talking, and I would just tell you a quick story. So I look to my left, and there's 5 guys. I see the guy in the middle's kind of big. They're all kind of big, and they're African American, and it doesn't matter to me. If you want to get out, and I can help you, I'm gonna try to help you get out because I learned a lot. And I'm looking at them, and they're talking, and I said, the priest didn't really like what I did this, but I said, excuse me. I'm looking right at them. I'm like, is there something, you want to share with us, with the group? And I think that was NA when I was doing that group. And they're like, oh. I said, listen to me. I said, I know 4 of you are following the one. I said, the one might have led you here. He's definitely not going to lead you out of here. I said, if you want to learn, grow a pair, and listen. Because I could see 2 of you trying to listen, but he keeps talking to you. I was like, listen, lead yourself. For once in your life, lead yourself out of this. Break the chains that bind you to this type of life. And afterward, the guy met me 2 days later in the mess hall on the side because they were Bloods. That's a gang. And he said, Anthony, thank you so much. Thank you. He said, I'm going to PC. I was like, they don't have PC anymore. He goes, well, what do I do? I said, I'll talk to you. PC is protective custody. He wanted to get away from that male. He wanted to get away. Something in him, he was like, I'm done with this life. I can't do this anymore. I'm in prison. But they keep you bound like that. So I talked to him a little bit. He ended up going, transferred to Southwoods. I don't really know what happened to him. His name was Kenny. Nice young man, and I hope he made it. But prison will grind you down and keep you stagnant.
And the other thing is, can you just talk about mental health and addiction in prison?
Okay, so instead of putting people in hospitals, I don't know when they started it, they put you in prison. Now they medicate you. Now, I actually ran into this problem the same time I saw the priest when I was in that seg. So they'll put someone that shouldn't be with anyone, they'll put him in your cell. You're in a 2-man cell with a person who has mental whatever. Now, when I had a guy with me for a week, I would barely sleep because I could see this guy was in trouble. He didn't mean harm. He was just talking to himself. I mean, he had issues. So finally, I talked to the sergeant. I said, you know who I am? I says, listen. He said, he should have never been in your cell with you. And they moved him. Not an hour later, the cell he was in, he jumped on the guy who was in the cell. So they're not providing any real mental health. They just want to give them drugs, Cinequan, all the rest of them.
The Fixer, Seroquel, gabapentin.
Yeah, all of that. That's all they really, so they don't help them in any way. And the other thing is they can't really get in trouble. So you might go to ADSEG again or lockup.
Can you explain what ADSEG is?
ADSEG is administrative segregation. So if you do something wrong, it's a separate pod, and you are in 20, you have 1 hour a day rec. Other than that, you're in your cell. You lose most of your privileges, isolation. So, so this gentleman, they put him in another cell, and within 2 hours, there was a code, and sure enough, I could see that cell. The guy was screaming, this guy's crazy, he just jumped on me, I don't know what he did. There's a lot of people in prison that should not be there for those reasons. I mean, I don't know what their crimes are, that's a separate issue, but a lot of these people are being thrown into prison today. And the public doesn't really know about this. And I mean, some people act and pretend, but a lot of them don't, and a lot of veterans. I've met a lot of veterans, really good guys, who were in there for a long time, and they were just, it was sad. It was sad.
So I just want to, so on the mental health, so I also have the pleasure of working with Joe DiFrancesco in Essex County, the Essex County Corrections Civilian Review Board. And we work with psychiatrists and psychologists, and the fellows that have been there for long periods of time will say, 20 years ago, Jim, there was, 25% mentally ill. And now they all suspect the line has crossed 50. And so, do you agree with that? Easy. And so what's happening is you have the dangerous conflation between at times a violent population and a mentally ill population. So we had the situation where there was a circumstance in Essex County Jail. There was a gang member. Somebody walked up who was mentally ill, said A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, kept saying it and saying it and saying it. And the gang member didn't want to engage, and finally he engaged with awful consequences. The point is when somebody comes in to the correctional facility at 3 o'clock in the morning and a correctional guard is there for intake, I mean, you could provide something called a compass assessment, but you have a correction officer, you don't have a psych there. And that person goes then into a holding cell and then goes into general population. The challenge is, just for 30 seconds, I appreciate your patience, it's very difficult to get someone into even a step-down psychiatric care unit. The reality is a judge will say, all right, McGreevey, they'll have no problem sentencing you to A, B, C, D in terms of whether it's 364 in a county jail or prison. But to take away your freedom and to put you in a psych unit, you necessarily, typically will want a medical review or diagnostic review, even a nurse practitioner review before you derive your freedom. That's one thing. How does someone get from in front of Judge X to a step-down unit, which would be far more appropriate, even on the short term, let alone the long term? Secondly, CMS, the agency that oversees Medicare, for those of us who have the benefits of Medicare, CMS will not typically pay for mental health care in a correctional setting, so that they will only pay for mental health care if a judge provides, and there's one pilot in California, and New Jersey tried valiantly to secure a pilot, weren't successful. But typically CMS will only pay for that mental health care if a judge sends someone to mental health care as opposed to a correctional setting. So that the reality is, whether you're a correction officer, you're a warden, you're director of, or you're an inmate, people significantly understand that there's this precipitous rise of those that are mentally ill within our correctional settings. Flash back to my dear friend Jack Fay, back to the Byrne administration, when we closed all of those facilities, those psychiatric facilities, which were themselves awful and heinous. But at the time, we were promising that there was going to be community-based psychiatric health care, mental health care. Colorado actually does it right. New Jersey never replaced that. So then what happened was, I always say, the best places to get mental health and addiction treatment were your county jails, and then your state prisons. Sub-parenthetical, the two psychiatric institutions for those that are criminally insane have waiting lists that wrap around the state. So that if you're the warden in Essex County and you can send someone to Ann Klein or a particular facility, you also have to grapple with the waiting list. And so I just want you to keep in mind that the intersection between mental health and the criminal justice system not only happens in tragic circumstances at the point of crisis, where a mentally ill person is acting out and the police officer is trying to grapple with those circumstances, but it also happens in the criminal justice system itself, in county jails and in state prisons. For my nickel's worth, I think we've gotten so much better at how we treat addiction, in large measure thanks to the late Senator Ted Kennedy and Congressman Joe Kennedy. We've really focused on addiction, and in New Jersey. I would also argue thanks to Governor Christie, who had a major drive for addiction treatment. But the place where we really lack in this state, and I would argue nationally, is on mental health, mental health, mental health. And if you ask any inmate of any county jail, of any state prison, there is, if you will, a feathering process, an identification process that happens among inmates themselves, where they discern for themselves the mental health of persons in their immediate environment. So what's disconcerting is correction officers will tell you, wardens will tell you, inmates will tell you as to the prevalence of mental illness. But there's a powerful chasm between that realization and having those persons taken from what I would argue that inappropriate setting, I would argue even stronger, grossly inappropriate setting, to where they should be in terms of receiving mental health. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even if you don't come in with a mental health issue, you have the prison system itself and the amount of time you're doing, and you're trying to deal with your family. Listen, people that don't know my story and they're around me for a little while, I'm not, like where I work. When I tell them, they're like, man, we can't even tell you did a day. You did what? It's by the grace of God that I kept my sanity. It's not easy. Even if, forget the death row, just the amount of time, the things you have to, everything that you deal with every day, we can't touch. There's a disconnect. My mother died, my father died, I couldn't go, they're in New York. So, there were times where I actually felt like, I don't know if I can keep going. But then again, my faith, God was like, boom, you're going to keep going. I'm not leaving you here. I got a job for you. And I know your heart. Your heart is pure. You did a terrible thing. You repent. I got you. You're going to be okay. And I just want to say this outside of the prison experience. When I got out and I went to Newark, New Jersey, Jim had a plan for me that was unbelievable. For some reason, the parole board really didn't want me to utilize his program. I have my ideas, but I don't know. But I got out. He was there for me, and he came to see me, and I had to do 90 days in the halfway house. But I went to reentry. They give you passes. They provide passes. I went to reentry. They were like, they'll help you get your license, or not your license, but clear up any tickets to help you get your birth certificate, Social Security card, whatever you need, because prison does help a little bit with birth certificates, Social Security, if you pursue it. His agency gets that for you. They got me a job. I went to job for ShopRite, right behind the reentry. The only thing I came out after knee surgery, and after like 2 weeks, I couldn't walk. So I had to stop working. I felt terrible. I couldn't walk. I tried too soon. And the computers, just the fact that reentry was there. I mean, I got on a bus. I stood on the corner waiting for a bus after 33 years. And I was like, and it was summer, and it was hot. I was like, is this real? And then I went to reentry, and they were so welcoming. They call us clients. And they were wonderful. From one person to the next, they were wonderful. They're like, listen, and you can go to any reentry in New Jersey. If you move, you can go. And they focus on the housing and your medical and reentry. Like, I'm in Pennsylvania. They don't have it. Philadelphia, for some odd reason, has some type of reentry. But Pennsylvania doesn't. I mean, I can't pick up a phone and call anybody for anything. But yeah, reentry was, it really, if it wasn't there, I really don't know like how this would have started. I mean, I have family, thank God, I'm okay, I'm sound, I can work. But reentry is so important, so important.
Thank you.
Very important. And this gentleman, I just want to say, this gentleman right here, this guy is the real deal. You know, listen, I'm a streetwise guy. I can tell you in a second.
Well, it was a lot being Irish. It was a lot for Anthony to overcome. But
I
mean,
can tell
just
you
like,
in a second. This gentleman is there. I don't know how he does it. He's everywhere, but he is tireless. And I call him my friend. I call him Jim. That's my friend. I will go anywhere for this gentleman. Anywhere.
Thank you, Anthony. Can we do a little questions? If anybody's any questions in the audience? Sure. Sure. Thank you. Still there. Still there in New York. Yep. No, my dear friend David Rothenberg. Yeah, they're still. Fortune is great. There's great work. Yeah, they do great work, Joe. Anybody else? Monsignor? Well, you know, this sounds so pedestrian, but one of the biggest things are, like right now, Christmas toys. So for every father or every mother who's in prison or just came home, they don't have anything. They don't have any money.
No.
And so holidays for most of us are times of connection and family and seeing relatives or that grumpy uncle or whatever. But it's community. Like, holidays in prison are just painful.
Just another day. Even now, like holidays are different for me because I kind of, there's like still like a little disconnect. I mean, my wife's birthday was the 8th, mine's the 20th. I took her out and everything, and I bought her flowers and everything, and I was just amazed. Like, she smiled. I was just amazed that it's like the simple things. But
holidays are painful because you're away from your family.
Listen, most of us, if you have any sense at all, you try to just stay as busy as possible. Stay as busy as possible.
So
really.
For us, and I'll send it to Dick, but so when women come out of prison, there's no feminine hygiene products. There's no men and women, there's no socks, there's no underwear. We're talking about basics. So, and it sounds crazy, but if you put on a fresh pair of socks, if you put on a fresh pair of underwear, if women have access to feminine hygiene products and they're coming out, and so it drives me lunacy that people are let out on a Friday evening because, you know, they're not going to have access to general assistance. They're not going to have access to reentry. We raise funds, and our funds used to house people like on Saturday and Sunday because, hello, if you don't have a family, what do you do on Saturday night? You know, you have nowhere to go. But I think, and Cardinal Tobin actually led the effort during COVID in fact, he hosted us at the cathedral where it was an interfaith. We had all the shuls, the mosques, the churches. We raised kits for people coming out. So I would say products for people coming out of prison are critically important, particularly during winter, because you get cold very fast. So I'll send to Dick. We have some sort of winter drive, what I call it, winter drive. But it's socks, it's underwear, it's bras, it's feminine hygiene products, and then we also have a special for toys for children. It's really tough because, you know, people say there's not necessarily generational impact, but I'm convinced there is. Because role modeling, you know, I saw my parents role modeling in the sense of being loved, the sense of identity. How do you identify yourself as a child? Who do you identify yourself with? And that's why we're a great believer in houses of worship, people, places, and things, which are so, like, also the other Catholic organization we work with is the Knights of Malta, who do great work. So, yeah. Yes, we get funding from the state, and so I just want to say thank you to Governor Christie started us. I was in Jersey City, and we expanded, and Chris actually said to me, we were in Newark, Jersey City, and Patterson, and Chris wanted to go to Ocean County, which was in the epicenter of the opioid crisis. And I could go on forever there. It's just, it's like I mean, fentanyl is the scourge. I mean, I'm in a church, so I won't do my rant on the Sackler family, but I mean, it's just a scourge. And so it's just so painful because 3 administrations of fentanyl, which is now in everything. It's in everything. It's in everything. It's in cocaine. It's in everything. Permanently changes the psyche. And then I'll pick up what Anthony says. I mean, the Department of Corrections, I mean, people write out scripts as if they were cotton candy because this is probably politically incorrect, but they want, you know, if you're a walking zombie, you're a lot easier to control. So, I mean, it's, you know, I don't want to be too glib, but to go to what Anthony's point was, it's hard to heal. It's work to change hearts. It's a lot easier to keep people anesthetized and in the same place. So yeah, we support Democrats and Republicans. It's a, you know, addiction, as Governor Christie said, it's an issue that faces all of us. Yep.
Yeah, I took houses again. I have still have the book.
Yep. I mean, I'm like, yeah, Sean. Yeah, he's a good friend of mine. Yeah. Yeah, but it's. Yeah, no, it's you know, yeah, COVID became convenient for, yeah. So but county jails you can go into. You could go into Essex County Jail. You could go into Middlesex County Jail. You could go into those county jails, and you know, Middlesex is a little further. It's in North Brunswick, but Essex is in Newark. Yeah, but it's so then it's also like about population control. I mean, the just, you know, the reality is jails have become more violent places, and jails are become more violent places in part because of who's in jails. So that's also been an issue. And I've seen it change. I mean, the county jail or the local jail used to be like knuckleheads or. And maybe in their parts of states where they're still there. But, yeah, sure. So we don't do housing because that requires so much work. I mean, Fortune does. So we work with community providers. There's a great Reformed church, like, say, for example, in Highland Park. There's different faith-based organizations. In Atlantic City, we work with Jewish Family Services. We work with different providers all throughout the state that provide for housing. But we believe in working with providers that are community-based housing. That's really important to us. I think, not just because I'm living there now, I think Hudson County has a great model. As Governor Burns says, he wanted to be Byrd in Hudson County so he can stay active in Democratic politics. I shouldn't say this is so politically incorrect, but I'll tell you this quick story, Monsignor. So I better not. But anyway, the camera's on. But anyway, afterwards. But so we try to work with institutions that build that foster sense of community, and we believe that's important. So what happens typically in most counties, you'll get a voucher and you'll go to building A, B, or C. We believe in congregate care. I mean, some institutions do that really well. Like women with children, they should be grouped together so they can be supportive and loving. It's building community. It's breaking down. Anthony talked about the isolation of the cell. Breaking down, it's restoring a sense of love, restoring a sense of bondage, restoring a sense of the beloved community. Sure. Yeah.
Well, I have an amazing attorney and Jim. I went to the parole board first time, and they gave me a hit for 3 years. I'm under the old law, so I did half, about 20 months. And then I went back to the parole board. And they were like, to the parole board. I went back, it's a full panel. They have to release, you have to have a majority. And, look, let's be honest, not everybody should be released. There are some dangerous people. But they do their job well. And you have to earn your right to go back to society. And we all should. No one should. I have guys all the time, I want to go home, I want to be free. I'm like, what are you doing? I see you outside all the time. I don't see you in any programs, in church, nowhere. So do you really want to go home? And they walk away. They get mad because the truth hurts. So the parole board saw all the programs, all the work I did, and I spoke to them my parole hearings were very long, longer than most. I think the first one was like 5 hours, the second one was like 7 hours. And by the grace of God, my attorney and Jim, and letters of support, they released me.
But I think that's really important to have a plan. So, I get the liberals upset and the conservatives upset because I think a plan is critically important. You have to have benchmarks, you have to have an objective plan. And that's one of the concerns that I have with bail reform, because bail reform, you can be arrested and then you're immediately released and there's no connection to addiction treatment, there's no connection to sober structured housing, there's no connection to employment. So it's connecting people, and every study, we live and die by the U.S. Department of Justice, BJA, Bureau of Justice Assistance. They have the best demographics, the best research in the country. And BJA will say, the more often you touch someone when they get out, the better their chances and the lower the recidivism. Now, I will say this, guys getting out don't want anything to do with the Department of Corrections, because the Department of Corrections, they understand as being punitive, rightly or wrongly, and sometimes fastidious. There's probably a better word. But the guys love reentry. They love reentry because they know we're advocates for them. But at the same time, there's a high level of discipline. There's a high level of accountability. And so we have a reentry training program in Kearney where we, CDL, HVAC, phlebotomy, General Electric, construction, computers. But you have to be on time. You have to be on time. You have to make every class. I'm not doing anyone any favors if you say, well, show up. You're supposed to be in class at 8:55 and you show up at 9:20. No, you're not walking into that classroom. You have to, it's about behavior, 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 behavior. We're a great believer in behavior. B.F. Skinner, behavior, Piaget. You have to change behavior. Now, I will say this. When you're a young guy out in the street and you're trying to survive, you're not necessarily being reflective about your behavior. You're just trying to survive. I mean, a lot of the young guys we work with believe they're all going to be dead by the time they're 32 or 35. So they're just running and gunning as fast as they can because they don't believe they're going to live. There's no such thing as deferred gratification. I'm never getting there. So part of it is if there's any good that comes with time but you have to have contact. All of our folks, they have access to a psychologist. If they want it, they have an access to a psychiatrist. So that we believe that you have to begin to have awareness, intentionality. If all you're doing is reacting to the stimuli like the pinball in the pinball machine, chaos is going to be resumed. But it's trying to be intentional, trying to be aware of the decisions you make. We always say, do the next right thing. Sure.
Many people here might know Mary Ryan, who's blind from Westfield. She used to, when she was all in prison before COVID, every Monday to do prayer groups. How do people who want to volunteer?
That's Department of Corrections.
Could I answer that?
That's the Department of Corrections. I mean, it's like, it's.
I used to go with the lady in front.
Yep.
Every morning, your former
Yep.
colleague, and you
Check.
said that you used to teach current events that were
No.
on prison every Saturday morning.
You know what, if you could, I'll just ask maybe, well, if you can just write a letter and put it, and I'll send it to the Commissioner of Corrections.
Can I say something, Jim?
Sure.
The most important thing communities could do is really find out what's going on in the prison systems. You see, there's such a detached, everyone's living their life, whatever age you are. You have your own family, your own issues, especially the economy and everything that's going on. Who has time to worry about what's going on in a prison? But that's how they continue to work the way they work. Look, prison is there for a reason. And a lot of the guards, the guards like me because I didn't dislike them. They didn't put me there. No one put me there. I put myself there. I wasn't mad. There's a lot of angry people in prison because everybody put them there but themselves. But there's no, see, when I speak, and not because it's me, but when I come up to the podium in the programs and speak, they all shut up because they're like, yo, this guy got a lot of time in. And he lives very well. He knows what he's doing. Let's listen to him. Maybe we can get some help. So I will help people. Prison it just runs. It's just a machine.
And you're isolated.
And they're isolated. And until people start to become aware and maybe involved, maybe then it will
And
change.
just like, if I can jump in with Anthony said, like, there are different models of prisons. I mean, people talk about Norway, and people say, why am I giving them congregate housing? Well, so the point is, and I agree with Anthony, there's a small percentage of persons who should never get out, ever. But that being said, 97% of the people
Very small.
return to the community. And so if you teach people how to live in community and be in community and have responsibility, this sounds crazy, like washing the dishes, making your bed, doing small things well. That's the beginning. And so it's always about behavior. So I'll take one last, sure. They choose us. Well, so there are three ways. So one, we get max outs. New Jersey also has one of the highest, New Jersey has one of, so that's, by the way, I just want you to know you're in very good company. I was at my daughter's, like, going back to school, and the turn left. And she said, my daughter said, I knew it was you. I didn't have to turn around. You can't figure out how to shut that off. But so we have a lot of people maxing out. So what happens is, and I don't want to turn the discussion, but in New Jersey, sex offenders have basically lifetime parole. And I will say what happens in those cases, there's very different types, very different classifications. I had a buddy of mine from high school. I went to St. Joseph Metuchen. His younger son was in college. He was corresponding with somebody who he thought was a 16-year-old girl, happened to be the state police, and became a sex offender, right? Lifetime reporting. That's, to me, very different than the homicidal maniac sex offender, rapist, who should be in prison for all eternity. But what happens is, this guy could actually be worse than me. But what's happening is, when I was at the parole board in the Kane administration, there were about 23% of folks that were sex offenders. Now it's over 50. So what happens is, if the parole board is responsible for more sex offenders, be they the worst tier or the minimal tier, that means there's less opportunity for parole. And so what happens is, we have a significant number of people who max out. Max outs are the people that I love working with, or guys that have been in there for huge swaths of time. So we get max outs, we get people on parole, and I'm a big fan of parole. I think Sam Plummer, our chairman, does a great job. They're a little exacting sometimes. They're a little too fastidious, but it's important. Parole, and then we get people from probation, people that are in county jail. We also get people from drug court, And now we get a significant number of veterans. We get a number of veterans, and the veterans cases are like everything that can go wrong does. And if I could just shout out to Hackensack Meridian, to Robert Wood Johnson Barnabas System, to their psych hospitals, they're tremendous, and to Carrier Clinic. There are a lot of places in New Jersey for dual diagnosis for addiction and mental health. There aren't enough places just for mental health. And a lot of these veterans, so you know, have the highest rates of suicide, the highest rates of homelessness, and the highest rates of mental illness. And so they're coming home with all of this trauma. And so, but that's how we get the folks. I think, a gentleman in the back.
Yes, a very quick testimonial before my question. You helped my friend Eugene a few years ago. I think you know who I'm talking about. A former medical professional.
Yeah.
And saved my life 20 years ago with a medical diagnosis. I referred him to you. You put him in the program. You turned his life around. You helped him to regain a foothold in society. You changed not only one life with that, but two. So thank you.
Thanks.
So my question, beyond direct assistance to your organization, which was wonderful, in your remarks, it sounds like legislative, institutional, systemic reform. Is that something we can hope for? Is that something?
Sure. I mean, I can provide information on some of the legislative changes. I also think, you know, our educational system, I can go on for, I can rant. If you look at the German system is bifurcated where you can go on to, you know, university education, what they call Hochschule, or Hochschule, and then there's gymnasium where you learn a trade, right? It's what we used to call, you know, years ago, my father's generation, workshop or to the trades. You know, the reality is, does anybody call a plumber here? You know what the cost of a plumber is. You know what the cost of an HVAC is. We give out more certifications in terms of CDL, HVACs than, say, for example, the entire Jersey City public school system. And so what happens is if you have a single track, I mean, someone had said that, you know, the United States has a educational system based on an agrarian economy, but an agrarian economy doesn't exist in 82% of the nation. I mean, you know, you can make the argument, what are we doing closing, you know, for July and August, maybe different parts, et cetera. But anyway, the point being is technical education with what we call industry recognized credentials. That's what we're all about, industry recognized credentials. So at the end of the day, we have women. I didn't think this was gonna work, bluntly. Francine Lafrac funded a program for, she said, I want to do this program for phlebotomy for women. I said, who's gonna, and it's taken off. By the most prominent blood laboratories in New Jersey are using. So it's industry recognized credentials. What I think we've got reentry pretty well situated, but I think what's so important is, as my dad used to say, the best social program in the world is a job. Now, there are those that are mentally ill. My sister works with our veterans, and there's a great guy who was homeless for 6 years. She got him housing, she got him a job at ShopRite, bless you, and he held it for 2 months, but you know, it was after 6 years of homelessness, it wasn't going to happen, and you have to accept. But for overwhelmingly, I would say for about 62% of our clients, 64% of our clients, they should be employed, if only on a low level. And then there are people like Dorothea Bon Jovi. You may recognize her name. Dorothea's run something called JBJ Soul Kitchen in Red Bank and in Toms River. And what she does is she will allow people to work there for their food. And so there are persons that are suffering mental illness just for the dignity of work. So part of this is that, you know, mental health, it's a really tough, by the way, I'll send to Dick, we're doing a great conference on mental health. We have it every year on Holy Thursday at St. Peter's. And we've got a Yale University School of Medicine neurophysicist. We've got Dr. Petros Lavonis, head of psychiatry, Stanford. We have a great group talking about mental health and best practices. One, what do you do with individuals who have come into contact with the criminal justice system? How to pull them out? We're looking at the Miami model. Miami's done some really good things. And then what do you do with folks when they come into jail? How do you figure out whether or not they should or should not be there? But thank you. But I'll send you some legislation. Uh-oh, we're
just
getting
want-
the hook.
I just want to say thank you all for letting me speak, and thank
And
you all
by the
for coming.
way, I just want you to know, Anthony went out and got a new sweater, and I think he's looking pretty